Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have a Floridian as a guest, and there's a lot of solar going on there in Florida. This is Mike Moran. He's the Executive Director of Florida PACE. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Good afternoon, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I wanted to just kind of ask you what PACE is. And so it doesn't have to do with like race cars and pace cars or pacemakers. And I think it stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And it's something like you finance something through property taxes. Does that sound right?
Kind of, sort of. Yeah, it's interesting that actually that's kind of a industry term, believe it or not, in the Florida statute. It doesn't reference PACE at all. As a matter of fact, in this legislative session, there was some clarity to that. But we're what's called an independent special purpose district, which is a definitional thing in Florida. And we exist by the Florida legislature that gives us power and authority to put something on a property tax bill. And that something that you put on a property tax bill has to have a public purpose. And in this case, with PACE, it's either hurricane hardening, a business or a home, or as you mentioned, energy efficiency, which is, I think, your focus here today, which I'm happy to support. But it's interesting, in Florida, the main focus was energy efficiency and hurricane hardening. But the third variable, which was not the intent of the legislature to begin with, was getting roofs on folks' homes to get insurance here. Insurance is a big, big topic, as you can imagine, with the hurricanes. But yeah, we exist, and our power and authority is to put that on the property tax bill to get the private bondholders paid back. Yes, sir. We go on a property tax bill.
Okay. And so you go on the property tax bill, and we're mostly here interested in how it works with solar, although clean energy and terrible storms that come through are awful things, hurricanes, all that kind of stuff. So how does it work with the solar?
Yes, so again, that two-pronged approach at the legislature being public purpose. We can only put something on a property tax bill, us acting as a quasi-governmental entity to be able to put that on a property tax bill. It has to have a public purpose. And in your case, which your interest is that one of those, a big public purpose, is renewable energy. Again, the hurricane hardening gets a lot of attention, obviously, because of the hurricanes, but the energy efficiency is a big variable to this and helping folks and businesses finance that ultimate goal of a public purpose.
So like say somebody in Florida, because this is statewide, I guess, right?
Yeah, the interesting landmine question. We've been struggling in the court systems of whether we were eligible to do it statewide or we had to get local authority through what's called an interlocal agreement. We were allowed to do it statewide, carrying out that public purpose. And in this last legislative session, it actually changed to where we need local authority to be able to do it through the local county commission. So the local county commission has to sign off on allowing us to come in and offer this solution to their residents.
That's interesting. So are the counties, some of them are for it and some of it are against it? Is that how that works?
Yeah, it's been quite an ordeal over the last couple of years with, frankly, lots of drama related to it and lots of misunderstandings. And there was some very uneducated discussions going on, if you ask me, and ultimately led to a legislative change that the local authorities want to say yes or no and be able to put specific rules related to it. Which the irony of it is we were already doing many of those things. For example, when somebody comes into this system and they want to do this financing for their home, for example, all phone calls are recorded and they have an opening and closing call before the deals are financed. And so people are fully aware of what they're purchasing. So it was things like that that created definitely drama throughout the state of whether we had the power and authority to put that on a property tax bill or not. And that was settled twice in statewide circuit courts. And ultimately, it was, I guess, a week and a half or so ago now, we actually literally went to the Florida Supreme Court over this. Oral arguments were heard, I guess, over maybe a little over a week or so ago now. And we will wait to hear from the Florida Supreme Court over that very question.
Yeah, one of the good things about the PACE programs that I've heard about throughout, different states at least, is that you can buy a solar system. And since you finance it with property taxes, that means the property tax bill goes up a little bit. And when you sell your house, you sell it with, the solar system goes with it. And you don't have to worry about what happens if you sell the house and there's a power purchase agreement or a lease or, something like that. So is that kind of what you're seeing in Florida too?
Yeah, you got it. That's it. With the overall concept being is that we're not loaning to people. And loan is a very definitional word that we don't use. It's an assessment on property. And so people like, oh, it's a PACE loan. It's obviously very definitional, is that when you open up your property tax bill in the state of Florida, at the bottom under the non-ad valorem is you will see an allocation or an assessment that is taken to pay back the private bondholder that loaned the money. We don't use any government money for this program. This is all private money that comes into Florida, billions of dollars that come into Florida under private money. And the government nature of this is, again, that power and authority to put it on a property tax bill to get the private bondholder paid back. And so that's done, again, all under the umbrella of carrying out a public purpose. You wouldn't do that for like any type of normal financing. This has to be related to a public purpose. Now, that loan is, that assessment is related to property. So, for example, the folks that are living in the home, that is why your credit score does not matter, because we are actually improving the property, again, either commercial or residential, or improving the property, and the property is going to pay it back over the useful life of that product. So, for example, a solar system, let's say we were financing it for 15 years, it would be paid back over that 15-year period. And what's interesting to note is even if that property changes hands of ownership, that would be negotiated at the time of purchase, is that the new owner could take over that non-ad valorem assessment, or they would negotiate that at closing and pay that off. But that's actually an allowable choice here in Florida. I can't speak for any other state. Mm-hmm. To your point, it goes with the property. It doesn't go with the people.
That's kind of neat. And so they can't, but they still could pay it off ahead of time.
Yes, sir.
And so how does this work when, like, does a solar salesperson or, some company selling solar, are they the ones that set the deal up?
It's interesting. It comes to, we call them channels. It comes through different channels to us. It was over 17,000. I think it was like 17,120 inbound calls for financing requests. So for the suggestion that there was solicitation on this, that was some of the drama that we were dealing with, is the inbound calling. We can barely handle the demand related to this. But what happens is another channel is that you're out there shopping for a solar system and you're dealing with some type of vendor, and they're sitting at the kitchen table with you trying to figure out how that family is going to pay for it. There are very limited choices. They are either going to pay cash, they're going to put it on a home equity line of credit, they're going to put it on a credit card type product, which is called unsecured credit in our world. They're going to do nothing and not do it. Or obviously our interest is that they would finance that through the PACE program through the non-ad valorem assessment on the property tax bill. And yes, in answer to your question, the vendors, the actual installers, those folks would bring those solutions to some of those homeowners. But again, a lot of times the homeowners will come directly to us looking to try and finance, and they've already been dealing with their vendor or whatever person they want to deal with. We don't bring the contractors, is my point. They find their contractor, they select their contractor. We don't bring actual construction to the program.
So I kind of like gave up speaking Latin a while back, like 1,000 years ago or something. So what does ad valorem mean? So
on your property tax bill, at the top are related to what the local county commission does as your millage rate. Okay, so that's your traditional, when you think of a property tax, that's at the top of your bill. At the bottom of your bill are non-property tax things like fire assessments, in our case, PACE, hospital boards, things like that. So at the top of your property tax bill is related specifically to your millage rate on property. And on the bottom are all the other things that are allowed to be put on your property tax bill by law.
Okay. All right. Great.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Industry lingo.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. It's just hard to figure out. Do you know, like, let's just start off with across Florida, what percentage of people would be eligible for PACE?
The underwriting, this is statutory. This is not through us. This is through statute of Florida law. The underwriting, I call it underwriting. It's not definitionally called that, but just who's eligible is very broad. So, for example, some of the knockout questions, which are actually right on our website, when you go through a little pre-approval process, there's 6 questions there. And they're things like, for example, are you currently in bankruptcy? Or are you currently behind on a property tax bill? Do you actually own the property, or are you a tenant? right. Like it's very broad questions. And that's the reason it's such a popular program is it doesn't get into what your credit score is. We're interested in helping all property owners. And interestingly enough, in our Florida legislature, it says property. It doesn't differentiate between commercial or residential. And there's been movement over the last couple legislative cycles and in the future to kind of differentiate commercial versus residential for a variety of different reasons. But again, we don't differentiate between that in the legislation as we speak today.
So do you know, like out of the millions of people that live in Florida that own houses, like what percentage approximately are eligible for this? Because I think you said that some counties won't let you do it.
Oh, that's an interesting question, boy. And that was a big change in this last cycle is it got significantly impaired because what happened is with two circuit court rulings in our favor, it was clear that we were carrying out a statewide public purpose and were eligible to fund throughout the state. So that answer was 100%. What happened is as soon as that legislation hit, which would be effective July 1st here, just this past July, is that immediately we had to halt those financings and make sure that we were in having some type of interlocal agreement with these local communities. So we are, as we speak, still frankly struggling with that to get back into these communities because we have to actually have formal legal authority to do so at the local level, which has definitely put a speed bump in the road for sure. So yeah, it's on our website. It shows specifically if you click on it in the different communities of where we have that. Some of them were still under past agreements, which are fine, and some of them we're negotiating as we speak. So we definitely took a couple steps backward and are trying to gain traction on that for sure.
So that website is floridapace.gov, it looks like. And so do you think like half the people in Florida can do it now while you're going through approval processes from different counties and things like that?
Oh, I would say at this point now it's probably less than half for sure, but a variable to that can't be ignored in this. It doesn't matter what these local commissions say, it doesn't matter what tax collectors have to say about it, doesn't matter what we have to say about it. A massive variable to this is private money. And these folks, big institutional banks and investors, they're the ones who are funding these programs. Again, this is not taxpayer money. So that those private dollars, they want to make sure that their bond is validated and their bond is secure because they're like, wait a minute, I'm not putting this money and investing in Florida unless I know I'm going to get paid back on that property tax bill, which means I will give you the much lower interest rate. And if there's any hiccup in that, it affects the private market investing in this, not what any governmental official says. So they're sitting on the sidelines a bit, waiting for this Florida Supreme Court ruling to make sure it's clear that that bond validation, just like it sounds, validating a bond, is secure. But we've got some great partners in here that understand the bigger picture here. And we're still trucking along, but it was definitely a step backwards for sure.
So when that happened, I think you said July is when it happened, where they made the change?
It was effective July 1st. We went through the last legislative cycle, which was early in the year, but it took effect on July 1st.
So do you think that there's a big decrease in the amount of solar going into Florida because of what happened in July?
I'd hate to speculate on solar specifically, and it's bigger than even just PACE. It's the bond market as a whole in Florida. What happened is when the tax collectors in Florida, a few of them said, I don't like this PACE program and I don't want to put it in here. And they said, I'm not going to put it on the property tax bill. And tax collectors in the state of Florida, I can't speak for any other state, tax collectors in the state of Florida are what's called ministerial. They don't make any policy decisions whatsoever. They do not make policy. Well, we had a few tax collectors in Florida that thought that they could make policy and said, I'm not going to put it on the property tax bill. Well, what it did, it created a shudder through the private bonding market. Like, what do you mean you're not going to put it on the property tax bill? And it goes well beyond PACE. It's any independent special purpose district in Florida. That's why when I mentioned earlier, your first question was very deeper than you thought and an excellent one, is that it's beyond PACE. We are an independent special purpose district, and there are other ones well beyond PACE. So that's why it went all the way to the Florida Supreme Court to clear this up.
And so do you see a brighter future?
I do. I think some heavy legal scholars that I trust their opinions on this were paying close attention. Many folks were paying close attention to those oral arguments in the Florida Supreme Court. And it's just a lot of common sense that this needs to be moved in the fashion that we suggest to create that security in the bond market, which affects PACE, which affects solar, which affects all the independent special districts. Sorry for the long-winded answer to that related to specifically solar, but it's well beyond solar because it's that bonding mechanism that allows me to bring the money to carry out your mission of solar. It's definitely a domino effect.
Do you know about PACE in other states too? Is it a big thing in a lot of other states?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, again, kind of segregated into two different worlds of commercial versus residential. Commercial is very prominent throughout the country, with residential being much less, meaning we're talking Missouri, Florida, California, peppered a little bit. But the residential is so much more high intense transactions, just volume alone with residential. The commercial are very large deals, incredibly sophisticated, layered financing with other banking institutions. So again, there's been some movement at the Florida legislative level to separate commercial and residential. For example, on a residential, if you do financing with us and 10 days later you hit the lottery or you get an inheritance or you come into some money, you can pay off with no prepayment penalty whatsoever under residential here.
What if you rob a bank?
You rob a bank, any of them, you have to pay $50 for a payoff notice, and that doesn't go to us. It goes to the company that actually calculates it, just like you're paying off a loan. You pay your $50 with your stealing from the bank or whatever you did, and you're out. Well, commercial, you are allowed to have, there's such sophisticated deals, you are allowed to layer in pre-penalties in commercial, for example.
Okay, so everybody just bring in your suitcases full of cash then. That'll work. They just bring it right to you, Mike?
Sure, if they wouldn't be calling us probably if they had the suitcases of cash, but I get your idea.
Uh-huh. Okay, great. And so maybe we can even kind of explain a little bit about PACE. So if you have like traditional solar financing, like a power purchase agreement or a lease, it gets a little bit tricky. You have to read the contract for when you sell your house. And that actually prevents a lot of people from even getting solar because they're afraid I don't know, I might move, something like that. And so I think PACE is supposed to be a way of, I guess you said not to say financing, so I can't say financing, but something like that, an analog to financing or something like that. And so you can sell your house. And it just goes along with the property tax. But I'm also wondering too, what if somebody has solar on their house and they're they had some hard times and they took the solar off their roof and scrapped it or something like that. Took it with them, disappeared with it, left south of the border with their solar system or whatever it is. Well, for you, I guess that would be Cuba. It would be swimming. And so what happens in a case like that with PACE? Does the new property owner still have to pay the property taxes that were put in place for that system, or does something else happen? Or is it just like any loan, every once in a while somebody defaults?
Awesome question. So let me use the analogy of a roof because you can make it parallel to solar or anything else we do. A traditional roof is a 30-year useful life, let's say, okay? Depending on the shingle, it's 20 years to 30 years, let's say.
Depending on how many hurricane eyes it goes through.
Yeah, really. That's half joking, but half true here. So I put a new roof on that's going to last 30 years, right? I'm 2 years into it, and I decide to move, and Sean's going to buy my house, right? You and I sit down to negotiate this, and you look at the bottom of the property tax bill, and you say, hey, Mike, I don't want to pay that non-ad valorem assessment at the bottom of the property tax bill. I want you to pay that off at closing. I say, listen, Sean, you're going to have the useful life of that roof for the next 28 years. I think you should pay for it. That is a negotiation that you have at the time of sale of the home. Okay. If it is decided that I negotiate better than you and I say, Sean, you're going to take it for the next 28 years, you just keep going on. You're going to get the property tax bill and it'll show up at the bottom of your property tax bill going forward for the next 28 years. If you muscle me and say, I'm not buying the house unless you pay that off, you would pay that off like you'd pay off any other HELOC loan. You would pay it off like any other lien that would be on a property. So it's just because it's PACE doesn't make it any different. It's the easiest way to think of it as the home equity line of credit. It's very similar. The difference is the home equity line of credit is more sophisticated in the sense of a mortgage, but the concepts are very, very similar. And it's related to, back to the original conversation we had, is you are improving property. Who is going to get the benefit of it and who should pay for it? That's all the negotiation is at the time of sale.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. I just thought of a weird idea. Is there any thoughts of having a program, there's a lot of homeless people in the world and things like that, where PACE covers the entire cost for the house that, of course, has solar on it? Has anybody ever thought of that?
Oh, God, I don't know. I'd have to have a couple glasses of wine to think that one through.
Okay, well, we'll wait. Okay, we're back.
You want to do it right now? The time is it? No, I think we're drifting into mortgage, and then the banks obviously have something to say about it. Ours is, again, I cannot remodel a kitchen. I can only finance, which, by the way, finance is the fine word. Loan is the bad word, because a loan is to, in theory, a person. That non-ad valorem assessment is, I have the authority to put it on a property tax bill. That's how this is so powerful. The reason I can get the lower interest rates that are literally 20 points lower than a credit card is because of that security of the property tax bill. To me right now, if I'm going to loan you, Sean, money to put solar on your house, the obvious question is, how are you going to pay me back? And if you say, well, I'm going to put it on my word, it's 29%. If you say I can put it on your property tax bill, it's 9%. It is literally 20% difference.
That's a huge amount over time.
And that's why, is that secured. That's why being on the property tax bill, we're going all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, is if I can't put it on the property tax bill, it's like any other credit card is unsecured debt, and you add 20 points.
Yeah, anybody trying to buy something with 29% interest is going to, it's just not worth it. Like buying solar, whatever. It's just like what you're paying for something is going to be like tenfold or, of what the original price was after you include the interest. It's 29% compounds pretty hard.
Yeah. Like when you're walking through Home Depot and you see the water heater there and you look at the bottom fine print and it says, we'll finance the water heater. And it says at Home Depot, if you look at the fine print at the bottom, all of that is a mini little credit card of unsecured debt, and it's going to be 29, 32%. Is the difference is I'll finance the water heater, which is eligible improvements related to us, and I finance it at 9% because it goes on that property tax bill. That's the difference of how I get the lower interest rates from this private money.
Sure. And is there any defaulting that goes on with this kind of thing, or is that not built into the program?
Well, it's interesting. There was a gentleman named Dr. Sean Snaith. He's actually, I believe by definition, he's an economist. Very, very, very respected in Florida. As a matter of fact, a huge percentage of the municipalities and counties hire him at the county levels and city levels to actually do economic analysis for them. His name is Dr. Sean Snaith. He did a study on this and actually took the data and pulled the data, and I believe Yale touched on this as well, is that interestingly enough, is any property that had a non-ad valorem assessment with PACE on it, the default rate was actually lower than traditional default rates related to any type of mortgage behavior on residential property. So I can't speak to why. It was just raw data. My instinct would tell me it's because you're probably dealing with a more sophisticated buyer. They understand what they're purchasing. They went through the recorded phone calls. It wasn't some impulse buy that they didn't understand what they're getting themselves into. But, people get disabled and sick and lose their jobs, and there's all sorts of reasons, as you know.
Well, I don't really see how anybody could default that easily with PACE, because you go broke, you die, whatever, some terrible thing happens, and then the bank owns the building or the house or whatever it is, and then they'll sell it to somebody else. and then they could pick up the property tax there, or it would come out of the price of the building. Maybe the building would burn down or something, or sink into the sea due to sea level rise or something like that. But it's kind of hard to come up with ways that you could default on something like that.
Yeah, there's it's incredibly unique circumstances. I mean, like, leprechauns jumping out of bushes in a leap year for example, you could have a situation, for example, contaminated property that literally gets turned back and nobody wants it. The bank doesn't even want it. You could have a very interesting circumstance. Again, it would be related to polluted properties, for example. But again, it's a big stretch to your point.
Yeah, like some little small fraction of a percent of that would happen on houses or solar systems, whatever.
And don't forget, is the house went and got a brand new roof on it. So now just the day after the roof went on, the home, in theory, the home went up to a more market value that can be sold or get insurance. Here, for example, if your roof is over 15 years old, your insurance marketplace shrinks to an incredibly alarming small number of carriers that will write your business. At that point, if your roof's over 15 years old, you're probably going to our carrier of last resort called Citizens here. So again, it wasn't intended by the legislature, but insurance is a big piece of this related to the roofs.
Great. And so this type of financing too, like, do you see this all over the place in lots of states? I guess I could just go look it up on the Desire website. So that's DSIREUSA.org. And I know that's where they have PACE. I remember PACE was a thing earlier in the solar industry in California when half the solar in the country was in California. And I don't know, somewhere like 2008 to 10 in that kind of time frame. And I remember people were doing it more often than I knew about. And I haven't heard too much about it lately. So it's nice to see that people are still working on it.
Yeah, and usually I wasn't involved in the business back then, but it spawned, for example, out of California, the public purpose with earthquake hardening of foundational type stuff. Here in Florida, it spawned out of hurricane hardening with, again, solar being almost the second level for whatever reason, I don't know. In Florida, this last legislative session, for example, we added septic to sewer connections as an eligible expense, which was a big, huge deal for us because, water quality is a very, very large mission here in Florida. But again, wrapped around that public purpose. So my theory is it spawns in other states because of some other public purpose they're trying to fix, with solar just being the huge cherry on top. But again, it usually spawns out of another public purpose.
So I've always been taught that PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And it sounds like some of the things that you are doing are not clean energy. Like you were saying, septic, I guess you could get biogas out of that, or, hurricane hardening and things like that. So does it still stand for Property Assessed Clean Energy? Did it grow out of that, or how does that work?
Yes, sir. That's why it was so interesting. I tried to make a point, I didn't do a good job, is PACE is a lingo. It's a concept. And the concept is putting something on a property tax bill to carry out the public purpose. That's it.
So it's kind of outgrown what it stands for, like,
yes, sir,
specifically. So for what you're doing, PACE doesn't really have to stand for Property Assessed Clean Energy?
That's right. Like, so for example, is like when you say property assessed clean energy, you're like, Mike, what does that have to do with putting a roof on? It's like, again, the PACE is the concept of that tax mechanism we talked about. You're right. It's just expanded to a much bigger degree. As a matter of fact, I don't know if it'll ever shake that name off for other concepts in other states. But again, septic to sewer is the perfect example, But again, your original point, it came out of California for originally the solar that then expanded is my understanding of the history of it.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, hopefully they're not going to evolve into property assessed dirty energy or anything like that. Maybe we'll have to redo what PACE stands for. Like a lot of people in the solar industry have changed their initials of their organizations to include storage. So what will we go? It's still property assessed, but it's not always clean energy. So like property assessed cool equipment, maybe, or something like that.
Well, if we're going to come up with more acronyms, then I will definitely need the wine and Jack and Coke, because I've got enough acronyms in my life. The last thing I need is another acronym in my quasi-governmental world. But I'm happy to have any conversations, but again, it might be over entertaining
Okay,
ourselves.
so now you can have that wine and Jack and Coke, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay, we're back. I was just kidding, but we didn't really take that much time off.
I
But
can't finance that for the record, but
all right. Sounds like fun. So let's see. Is there anything else that you want to cover or talk about?
I don't think so. First off, I just really appreciate what you're doing because, by the way, that's my first podcast I've ever done. So, whatever, take that as a badge of honor, I guess.
Okay, you're going to be super famous.
Well, we'll see. But education is just a big part of this. It's like I hope somebody has I call it a light bulb moment. Like they're like, oh, I get it. And then they take it in their state and they do good things with that concept of property assessment. But again, it has to be wrapped around a public purpose. We can't be financing people's, backyard kitchen improvement type stuff, But again, the concept is just such a mission for me to make sure I do the best I can to educate folks on it, and then they can take it from there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Mike Moran, Executive Director of Florida PACE. And PACE just stands for PACE now. And if people are looking for other PACE programs in their states and want to finance something more creatively that makes a lot more sense especially than paying 29% interest, you can find out information about all kinds of renewable energy incentives over at the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency. That's dsireusa.org. And many people call it the Desire website, even though it's DSIRE, and then they make desire jokes about it. And we're not going to do any of those desire jokes today. We've done plenty of those in the past. And anything else that you want to say, Mike, or tell people where they can find you?
No, I can't think of anything. Thank you for the time, Sean. And at floridapace.gov, we've done our best. We have a bunch of little informational cartoon type videos and an application process and all sorts of frequently asked question type things there that we've done our best to all the questions over the years that we've received. We try and funnel it right there for answers. So if it's not there, call us. We're actually real people. We pick up the phone. We'll help you however we can. And that goes for contractors and others too that want to learn a little more. So yeah, I appreciate the time very much, Sean.
Yeah, and also it's a cold time of the year for most people. So is everybody invited to come stay at your house?
It's interesting how people do their corporate retreats. It's just funny how they do that this time of year. It's just always in January and February. It's funny how that works.
What part of the state are you located in?
We're in Sarasota on the west, or just south of Tampa, about an hour. Sarasota, Florida.
Okay. Well, I don't have to tell you to stay warm because that's just a given down there in Sarasota. So thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you, Sean. Have a good afternoon.
All right.